So this is group A11, and we're doing our presentation on biodiversity loss. And then my name is Tanner.
I'm Daniel McDonald.
I'm Madeline Mazanovsky.
I'm Jacob Moscalzo.
I'm Daniela Chancholo.
And I'm Taya Purnell.
And so what is biodiversity loss? So biodiversity loss is extremely important to society as it provides us with medicine, food, and water. And biodiversity loss is defined as a loss of life on Earth, resulting in a reduction of genetic variation or even a collapse of the entire ecosystem. There are many factors that have contributed to biodiversity loss, and it is an important issue that not only needs to be addressed in society today, but also needs to be solved. And over to the left, we have a picture of an African bush elephant, which has been endangered because of biodiversity loss. And then down here, we have a picture of a habitat being cut down. And so this is another example of biodiversity loss. Importance of biodiversity.
Biodiversity is necessary to support all aspects of life. It even plays a role in protection. For example, in wetlands, trees and soil work together to absorb rainfall. If both of these were to be removed instead of the water being absorbed, it would end up resulting in flooding. Another example are coral reefs. They are able to provide a natural defense from things that storms and waves bring into the coastlines. Other things such as microbial and genetic resources are protected by recycling, regulating pests, and increasing reproduction by pollination. This is essentially supporting all surrounding ecosystems that help not only humans thrive, but also nature. Biodiversity also aids in human health, essentially by protecting nature. And as a result, it creates a natural divide between nature and human civilization. This ultimately has been linked to lower instances in diseases such as Lyme disease and malaria. However, if biodiversity loss continues, it can take away from that. Things such as deforestation and urbanization not only remove the divide from nature and human civilization, but it also reduces the sizes of ecosystems. This results in animals living closer quarters with humans, and that closer contact creates an ideal situation for zoonotic diseases to spread. Also, as we know in the medical world, it is known that plants are used to make medicines. 25% of drugs in modern medicine are from rainforest plants, and 70% of cancer drugs are derived from natural products. With the removal of biodiversity, it increases the likelihood for species to go extinct, which could potentially lead to missing out on new medicational and medicine possibilities.
Without biodiversity, our entire support system for humans as well as animal life would collapse. We rely on nature to provide us with food, clean water, a lot of the medicines that we use, and to prevent flooding and other extreme weather effects. It's important to protect it, kind of as talked about before, because we run the risk of potentially running out of food, there being more natural disasters and a higher risk of zoonotic diseases. We don't realize how important that it is for wildlife to have their habitats, because it helps them thrive. It keeps them kind of more isolated away from us to help prevent those zoonotic diseases. Again, we run the risk of running out of food and water, which is a key part in our survival. And with biodiversity loss being on the rise, it is estimated that due to human-induced environmental changes, that 1 million plant and animal species are now threatened with extinction. We are seeing a decrease in the amount of plants that we're able to eat as humans because the land that they're grown on are being destroyed. So we aren't able to have them. And again, it protects us from those natural disasters from hurting us. Another really essential part of biodiversity, it helps us with solving the climate change issue. The destruction of forest ecosystems is responsible for 11% of all global greenhouse gas emissions caused by humans. So conserving forests would stop the release of these gases into the atmosphere. We hear a lot of talk about climate change and how it's happening and how we need to stop it. But people don't understand that the biodiversity plays a huge role into it because of all the trees and stuff that hold carbon from being released into the atmosphere. And the more that we destroy these forests and everything, the more carbon will be released into the air, not only harming us, but other wildlife. Yeah.
So now that we've told you about the importance of biodiversity, we're going to give you some reasons and explanations of how and why biodiversity loss occurs in our society. So one of the first main reasons why biodiversity loss occurs is through pollution. So pollution is a major cause, and as it has resulted in many animals being harmed due to the toxins that are in the air and in the sea. So one of the main reasons is it causes respiratory challenges with birds and other living organisms. For example, studies have shown that long periods of exposure to ozone pollution has resulted in birds having inflamed lungs, reduced egg production, and even lung failure. And then there's also been a study done by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they discovered that since 1970, the North America bird population has declined by over 3 billion birds. And so the birds that have had the most detrimental effect by pollution are the sparrows, finches, and warblers, because they have a smaller respiratory system. And so pollution affects them a lot more than it does other larger birds. And so they run the risk of dying and having respiratory failure. And then another thing that pollution has caused is it has caused acidification of lakes and oceans. And this refers to the level of pH decreasing in lakes and oceans. And so the pH becomes more acidic. And this can have a negative effect on the growth and development of animals as the pH is starting to become lower and more acidic. And so some examples of this happening is to coral, crabs, and oysters. For coral, because when the pH becomes too acidic, it slows down the development and growth of the coral reef. And then the same thing for crabs and oysters. The acidic pH prevents them from being able to build strong cells as a way to protect themselves. And then lastly, the last effect that pollution has had is it causes eutrophication. And this occurs when a body of water becomes too rich with nutrients. And so when pollution becomes too much and the abundance of nutrients becomes in the water, it causes a increase in algae growth, which causes an abundance of the two main elements, which is phosphorus and nitrogen. And this causes a loss for oxygen, as well as resulting in many aquatic organisms dying because of this. And then the second is invasive species. And so this has also resulted in biodiversity loss, as invasive species have altered and changed the food in an ecosystem. So invasive species is defined as a species that is able to adapt quickly to environment, reproduce quickly, and harm native plants and animals in that specific region. So some common examples of invasive species are the lionfish, the free-wheel swine, the Asian tiger mosquito, the yellow crazy ant, and the killer algae. And so invasive species cause many problems as they deplenish the resources that the environment has. And so one species in particular that has caused many problems within the reef is the lionfish. And the lionfish has caused many issues because they eat herbivores, and by eating the herbivores, none of the algae in the coral reef is getting eaten up. And so this allows for algae growth to be unchecked. And so when algae begins to become abundant in the coral reef, it begins to kill coral because it begins to shade and smother them. And then another issue that invasive species have brought is that they have carried diseases and illnesses which have affected other organisms and humans. And so one such organism that's an invasive species that has caused diseases and illnesses is the Asian tiger mosquito, and it has brought about the disease of the West Nile virus, which causes people to develop mild headaches and fever. However, it has also caused people to develop inflammation in the brain as well as the spinal cord. And then the last disease that is caused is dengue fever, which causes extreme muscle, joint, and bone pain.
So another one of the major factors in biodiversity loss is the destruction of habitats. The textbook states that the International Union of Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, details this factor by indicating a calculated contribution of 73% to species which are extinct, endangered, vulnerable, or rare. To add, the biggest contributor to habitat loss is human activities, for instance, deforestation, pollution, and urban development. A prominent example of this comes from an analysis of species of prairie within southern Wisconsin, which experienced a range of 80 to 60% in habitat destruction. This therefore led to the coverage of prairies within southern Wisconsin to dip from just 800,000 hectares to 800 hectares. So another factor within biodiversity loss includes overexploitation, sometimes called overharvesting. This regards the collection or harvesting of a resource, for instance, green halibut or African elephants, at a rate which surpasses its capability to rebound or recover. A couple of examples include the Greenland halibut, which faces political debate surrounding the total allowed catch levels, as the harvesting of this resource contributes a great amount to Greenland's GDP. Thus, coastal boat owners have placed pressure on politicians, and biologists have eased in their administration of total allowed catch advice. Another example includes African elephant species, which is endangered despite the international ban on ivory sale. The final contributor that I wanted to talk about will be global warming. To summarize global warming, know that it stems from an increased emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and its consequent increase in the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect itself is the reflection or radiation of heat back to the Earth's surface from gas emissions in the Earth's atmosphere. To add, climate change affects nearly every species and is especially detrimental for plants and some animal species which are not able to traverse large distances and migrate, thus contributing to biodiversity loss. Moreover, climate change influences geographic ranges. For instance, bumblebees exhibit shrinkage in their geographic ranges and thereupon contribute less to pollination. Global warming also influences some changes across different levels. For instance, at the organism level, the northern pika from the previous slide is largely inhibited in the amount of time it can spend foraging, as the increased temperature of the climate can exceed its body temperature limit of 3 degrees Celsius. On the population level, polar bears have also lost some of their environment for predation, as global warming has melted the ice platforms in the Arctic.
Now that we've told you about some of the reasons about how biodiversity loss occurs, we are now going to talk about some prevention measures.
There are many ways for us as human beings that will help contribute with biodiversity. We may not know it, but every day in our lives, some of us are damaging the environment rather than assisting the environment. These simple contributions like shorter showers, supporting local farms, planting your own source of vegetables and fruits, and not damaging habitats can make a huge difference in our world. If more people are convinced and start taking action toward these contributions, we may start to see progress within the environment around the world. Showers and supporting farms. To elaborate more on that, by taking shorter showers and supporting our local farms helps the environment more than we think. The less water we use helps the environment grow to its full potential. Water is one of the main sources that keeps our world growing, healthy, and keep our species alive. When it comes to supporting farms, it helps us have a healthier intake of the fruits and vegetables we buy from the store. It also helps by limiting the amount of chemicals and pesticides that are being added to the crops and the soil. With planting and habitats, planting our own food and crops can come a long way when assisting with the environment. By us increasing food production in the environment, we're also expanding natural habitats for insects and animals. Although some of us don't like when insects enter our home garden, we need to allow them to do their job so they can do their part of aiding the environment. Maintaining environments also helps with endangering our animal species and providing more room for them to grow. If we start treating the environment as if it were our house, the biodiversity wouldn't be filled with so much trash that's endangering animal life.
There are other measures that we can take as human beings to reduce the need for reduce biodiversity loss by recycling and reducing our carbon footprint. And by recycling, we reduce the need or reduce biodiversity loss by decreasing the demand for raw materials such as paper, plastics, metals, and glass. And by reducing the need for raw materials, we reduce excavating, we reduce going out and cutting down forests and reducing the amount of real estate that wildlife have, and therefore increasing the opportunity for wildlife to thrive and reproduce and overall increase that biodiversity. And the way that reducing carbon footprint is a preventative measure is by, as explained earlier, the greenhouse effect, by reducing the risk of a natural disaster occurring, such as a wildfire or a tsunami or natural disasters of that nature that can ultimately wipe out the real estate that wildlife have and reduce that biodiversity loss. Other ways that we can prevent biodiversity loss is by nature preserves and specialized action. Nature preserves such as Yellowstone Park is a national park that is not only government regulated and run by the government, but it also gives us as human beings and individuals to not only appreciate the importance of biodiversity, but spread awareness as well. And by these national parks being viewed by the public, it gives us a sense of appreciation. And also specialized action that can be taken place is reintroduction programs that have happened already in Yellowstone Park, such as the reintroduction of wolves that have been wiped out from that area, but reintroduction programs are increasing that biodiversity and bringing that back. Also, habitat restoration and protected areas such as national parks and wildlife crime prevention, such as the game and fish departments in every state. Every state has an agency that is supported by the state, normally the game and fish department, that is responsible for assuring animals are not being poached or illegally hunted and causing biodiversity loss.
And then these are all the references that we've used. And then thank you for your time for watching, and I hope you learned more about biodiversity loss today.